Greetings and salutations, everyone. Today we're going to continue our look at classical Greece, and we're starting with this picture from the Palace of Knossos. This is one of the last remnants of the Minoan civilization, and the frescoes, the paintings that you can see here, date back a little over 4.5 millennia. And the fact that they're still in that good of condition is really a testament to what you can make with the right applications and the right amount of work. So, without further ado, let's get started. Greece gives us a lot of legacies. That's the big thing we're going to look at today. And one of the first fields of study that are going to kind of be created at this time is the field of logography. And this is the goal of gathering information. The logos is the study, logos is logic, but L-O-G-Y, logy, is the Greek word for study of. So if you think of some of your classes you've probably taken before, this word, L-O-G-Y, actually shows up. Biology, the study of life. Geology, the study of the earth. Geography, the study of maps and applications thereof. This is a very broad, expansive type of learning and information gathering. And when it comes to history, the father of this discipline was a logographer by the name of Herodotus. Now, there'd be other individuals that had come before who had recorded history, but Herodotus wrote why things happened, why different entities and nation states might come into conflict. And in the history of Herodotus, he discusses conflicts with Persia, and he also talks about these fire-breathing ants. Now, obviously, one of those things is more true than the other one. The importance of the work he created, though, was explaining why something had happened, not just that the thing had happened. The city-states of Greece are divisible into different groups pretty easily. And one of the big ones that's going to be instrumental in shaping Greece as a collective whole is Sparta. It's located in southern Greece, and the Spartan city-state got started when the early archaic period, they attacked the city-state of Messenia and enslaved the entire city-state population. And this was a real huge endeavor because the population of Messenia was significantly larger than the population of Sparta. And if it was just a conflict, that would have been, wow, okay, so a small number defeated a larger number. But the Spartans very quickly realized, okay, we've defeated them and now enslaved them, and oh dear, they outnumber us. Well, what do we do if the Messenians don't like being slaves and decide to rise up? What the Spartans do is create the strictest militarized society that the world has ever seen. For Spartan children, they start military practice for boys at the age of 8. You have to be of the best physicality to be a member of Sparta. If you were born small or deformed, you weren't allowed to grow up there. And it was the expected norm that parents would take children like this and just leave them in the woods. And I mean, at birth, like the kid could be in some cases only a few weeks old, and that was the case. Or some parents who were even lazier than that would just leave a newborn baby in the middle of the street, which is haunting to consider. Athens, as the other big one to talk about early on, was a city-state that was ruled by tyrants. And tyranny in this concept, like when we talk about tyranny in the 21st century, it is a person who is abusing their power completely. In the classical age, tyranny means you are one person in charge of everything. And that doesn't mean you are abusing the power, it just means you hold all the power. And in Athens, this changes in 594 when we see a tyrant named Solon decides to divide up all of Athenian society into these 4 different groups: free men, free women, slaves, and visitors. And anyone in the top 3 groups could hold office if you are free, and a man. This in and of itself shifted the responsibility of ruling the state from one person to the masses. And in the same year, the Athenian people establish a vote. And the vote has come because of conflict that is rising with Persia. Persia, a local empire, is threatening to go to war. And Athens is given the choice, decides to give the choice, do we fight or not, to the people instead of one person. And this instance of deciding, will we fight Persia or will we, not fight Persia? And if we don't fight them, then the Persian army is going to show up, conquer us in probably a day, and we are just going to be another little principality of the Persian Empire, and we will lose any concept of free individuality in Grecian lifestyle. That will disappear. And the people of Athens decided they wanted to fight. And this was a really big deal because the struggle between Persia and Greece was this back and forth that went on for a long time. By the 6th century BCE, the Persian Empire stretched from modern-day Turkey into Iran. It was massive. It controlled a huge part of the Near East. And the Greeks viewed this very large empire, which is their neighbor, as a huge threat. The Persians, though, they don't view the Greeks as a threat. The Persians just view them as, oh, those are just some people who live on the peninsula over there. In 546, the Persians start taking the Greek city-states. Again, really not seeing a lot of fighting back. I mean, the Greeks fought back a little bit, but not too much. And the Persians don't initially do a lot to change Greece. The areas that are conquered, the Persians say, okay, you have to give your tax money, now it goes to us, and we're going to put this new flag up, and you're now part of our empire. And largely speaking, that was the big stuff that changed. It wasn't a very transformative occupation, but still it was an occupation. And after 2 generations, in 499, the Greeks decide no more of this. And a group of city-states in Anatolia, what we now call Turkey, Eretria, and Athens work together for a 5-year period to essentially kick the Persians out of Greece. And when the Persians decide, you know what, we're not leaving without a fight. We could defeat you so easily, this isn't even worth our time. The king of Persia, Darius I, moves on to try and defeat Greece. And in this first war, he is defeated. He is defeated outside of Athens at the Battle of Marathon. He was defeated so soundly. This was a humiliating defeat for the Persians, so much so that for the rest of Darius's life as king, one of his servants was required to come up to him and, ordered by the king, remember Athens. This servant was told to remind the king, remember Athens, at every meal. So at every meal, when he's sitting down, he is reminded of this humiliating defeat that was handed to him by this group he doesn't even remotely respect. So as you can imagine, that's going to kind of sit raw with him. About 20 years later, after Darius dies, the next king of Persia, Xerxes, decides he's going to attack the Greeks too. And this time, the Persian host is beyond count. I mean, even today, we're not exactly sure how big it is. Some people say it could have been as many as 2 million people invading Greece. And if that's the case, it's the largest military exercise since until the 20th century. Nothing is going to even remotely come close. A number of Grecian city-states, when they see this massive empire, which even if it's 100,000 people, was larger than anything the Greeks could have stood up to, some of the Greek city-states were willing to surrender. Sparta decides, we're not going to surrender, we're going to fight back. And Sparta was going to organize this host of Greek city-states to fight back. And the Spartans put up a valiant defense. The defense of Thermopylae, the Battle of Thermopylae, the 300 Spartans and their king Leonidas would stand against this host of innumerable numbers. They would stand for days against the Persian host, ultimately being defeated. And Xerxes would go on to destroy large parts of Greece, at one point even destroying Athens itself. But he was so distraught after seeing Athens burned down, he orders it to be rebuilt. Having an army that numbered into the hundreds of thousands and potentially millions, yeah, that's devastating to work with, but it means that you have to feed these guys every day. And finding food for 1 million plus soldiers on the move all the time, it's not realistic. So Xerxes' ambition kind of starts falling apart within a couple of years because he just can't keep this massive army together any longer. Some of the greatest legacies that the Greeks gave us is what we're going to kind of wrap up with. The first is the philosophy, the idea of the individual, the idea that I can rationally explain the world. I can explain why people act the way they do, what motivates them. And think about what motivates you. I mean, maybe it's food. Maybe you're hungry right now. Maybe you want money and you want to have a good paying job. So you're hoping, oh, I'll do good in school, then I'll get a good paying job and I can have all the shiny toys I want. Maybe you want that person who is the apple of your eye to look at you and smile, and that's what's driving you. The Greeks start this in understanding why we do the things we do. The first real father of this field of philosophy is Socrates, and he created this style of asking questions to get answers that became known as the Socratic method. And this methodology goes essentially that you ask one question, what do you want to be when you grow up? When you're out of school and you're ready to begin a career, what do you want to do? Okay, why do you want to do that? Okay, have you thought about doing something else? Why that? Okay, why did you decide to pursue option A and not B? Was money a deciding factor? Social status? What led you to think this way? And this method was really useful in pointing out maybe what drives us, but he also used it to point out the problems in society. Why are you in charge and not me? Why should I bother listening to you? Why is a warrior considered in some cultures more significant than a farmer? Why is the farmer only planting wheat? So these are questions that can potentially unravel a lot of larger questions in society, but it can also make other people kind of angry with, why are you always asking me questions? And ultimately that was what happened to Socrates. He was found guilty of corrupting the youth and sentenced to commit suicide, and he did. And the hope of the Athenians when they killed him like this was that he was just going to like, okay, well, now he's dead. But he actually became a martyr for this cause and would go on to influence numerous others like Plato. Plato believes that everything that you see, feel, touch, it is illusionary. It is a reflection of a larger concept. And the big allegory that Plato creates is the cave. And in it, you have in the cave, you have obviously a cave that you have a couple of people who are facing a wall, and there's a fire behind them so they can see shadows. And he says that is how we perceive the world. We perceive the world as shadows on the wall. It's not the real thing. It's just the illusion we make it out to be. He would go on to create an entire school to teach people, not just philosophy, but basically every field of study you can imagine. And our last big guy is Aristotle. This is a guy who studies at the academy. He studies briefly with Plato. He tutors, then goes with Alexander the Great, and he goes on to expand knowledge on a whole host of fields: politics, philosophy, ethics, logic, physics, astronomy, rhetoric, the ability to argue, meteorology, zoology, psychology. This guy becomes the master of it all. And by the time he passes, he really is the true jack of all trades. The Greeks also give us the Olympics. Now, this sporting event began in Athens. It began in 776 BCE. The goal was to honor the king of the gods by showing what man could achieve. And a lot of the events that we see here are going to be different types of foot races. There's distance, there's running and jumping, there's boxing and wrestling, there's javelin and discus throws. If you win, you get a laurel wreath. And this was a time where no matter what, people all across Greece would stop fighting. It didn't matter what the conflict was. It did not happen during the times of the Olympiads, because this was a time you could get together and show how much better you might be than your neighbor. In the field of the sciences, the Greek development in astronomy is really impressive. Aristarchus comes up with the idea that the sun is at the center of our universe. And he did this 2 millennia before Galileo did the same thing. Now, mind you, Aristarchus doesn't have a telescope. He's just like, he looks up at the sun and he says, why, I think if that thing is really important, that sun is really big, I bet we're probably going around that thing and not it going around us. Eratosthenes, he was a scientist, astronomer, mathematician, and cartographer, and he proved 2,500 years ago 2 things. Number 1, the fact that the Earth is round, and number 2, the size of the Earth. And he did this using a little bit of math, some shadows, and some sticks, and that's it. Euclid came up with geometry. Archimedes came up with the fundamentals of math, the mathematical tool pi, and a couple of interesting inventions, including a pumping system and potentially a death ray laser. Finally, Hippocrates was the father of modern medicine, and Hippocrates would be so instrumental in the field of medicine that doctors today take the Hippocratic Oath, an oath unto the father of medicine. And it's, I shall do no harm, I shall not prescribe poisons, I will not spread gossip about my patients, all of that stuff. And the last big social thing to point out is how different Greek women have it. This really changes per city-state. For example, in Sparta, you had men who start training for the military at the age of 8 and have to live in the barracks until they're adults. So women have a lot more freedom than anyone else in Greece because, you know, they can. The men are not around, so these women have the ability to go do something without a typified gender norm. In Athens, though, they don't have that. In Athens, we see that marriages are usually really unequal in age. In some cases, you see a girl as young as 12 or 13 being married to somebody who's in their mid-40s. And that was something that culturally was just accepted. Husband and wives might not go out together much. They might not have a lot of contact. And in most cases, it wasn't entirely uncommon for Athenian husbands and wives to sleep in different beds, sometimes in entirely different rooms. Marriage in this state was almost more of a social commitment than a romantic commitment. So today we talked about some of the big legacies that the Greeks left behind for us. I hope you learned something. I'll see you next time.